And so one of the important things we covered when we were talking about epidemics in the colonial context was the whole set of cultural elements. So similarly here, so already you got some elements of cultural aspects already in terms of anxiety and being with your elders during a difficult time and things like that. But here there are more specific ones, like the tragedy of people not being able to cremate or bury their dead, or even having proper funeral if the person died due to COVID. In fact, the state took over. The state took the body in a particular way, in a particular covered way. Sometimes the relatives were not even able to see, and so the body was disposed in a particular medically appropriate way. So that had a lot of personal, cultural implications. And there are also some other kind of cultural factors which particularly more pronounced in this case than about 100 years back. So which is about concern about privacy. So issues about concern, conscious about privacy and all that was not a big issue at that time, except like people being examined in the railway station, as I said, examining the armpit. So that, but then there's a different kind of a privacy about your life, privacy of your data, those kinds of things. So here, so apart from the physical discomfort and restrictions, the isolations, quarantine, other such things, there was this new element, concern over anxiety over privacy. So, for instance, the government officials, say for instance, the corporation officials would come and paste a notice outside your door. So, this house has got COVID infected people, and even the names of them. So, that would kind of produce stigma, or even sometimes in the for instance, in institutions where there is announced mail, so there is an announcement. This is to let you know that so and so in such and such block has been affected. And not only that, this person and his partner have been affected. So that leading to all kinds of unnecessary and gossiping. Oh, this person is living with a partner. Okay. I thought that was his wife. Oh, or I thought that was his friend, another male friend. Oh, he's a partner. Oh, okay. Those kinds of unnecessary gossip and loss of privacy, or even facts like how many daughters. Oh, he has daughters. Oh, I thought he had. So some people may not like to know what is the age of your daughter, and or that you won't have so many daughters, or so and so is your actual husband or your partner, or your exact status of marital status. That's all none of our business, so they're private. But then, so though the aim was not that, but eventually it was done for something else. But then these processes of privacy got compromised, and privacy again, as I said, things are different from what they were 40 years back. So now these are important issues. And so then because things are so publicly announced, and or posters were put, there's also that stigma of the infected person. So then if you're living in an apartment, then there's a fear about, oh, that person. So all these days they were neighbor, now they were COVID patient. So, and then all kinds of different kinds of attitude, and so can I use the same lift? Can I use the same corridor? Then again, some other related problem was the, as I was mentioning, so these are all some cultural attitudes. People said, oh no, I will somehow manage. My body, my family has a history of robust resisting of disease immunity. So let us not tell. So let's suppress the symptom or the ailment, which can sometimes prove fatal. So that's also beyond the kinds of difficulties or repression or repressive measures, or at least felt so by the people. So the difficulties could also be created by people to their fellow citizens. So this kind of stigma, looking at them in a particular way, and the stigma on the healthcare workers, because very rational stigma, because the healthcare workers are throughout the day exposed to COVID patients, and then when they come, so they are the new kind of untouchables. special social distance has to be maintained from them. So to the extent sometimes the landlords who's placed these health workers at rented to stay, so so the landlords force them to vacate because they were worried about the healthcare workers being in constant touch with COVID patients and what might happen to their property. But again, talking at a cultural level, there's also other part of cultural solidarity. So things were not always so all that negative. So there were very heartening instances of people not just stigmatically looking at the neighbors, but very proactively going, helping them, at least leaving stuff at the door. And then anyway, cell phone was there, so even if you don't see them or go near them physically, so you could at least talk to them, uh, keep them in better spirits, and do all kinds of other things. And also, the not all healthcare workers were treated the way they were treated by their landlords or other people who did negative things to them, including attacking them. So, on the contrary, many people, maybe majority of the people, held them in high esteem, appreciating the fact that while everyone else had lockdown and didn't have to go to office, schools, and other such things. So these were the people who had to not only go to work and work more than usual in very dangerous circumstances. So a lot of appreciation and all kinds of symbolic support, like the spraying of flowers from helicopters and aeroplanes at particular time. People going and standing up the terrace and showing their expression salute to that. Or sometimes people wonder what is the connection between the hitting of the thali plates and clapping and the blowing of conch shell, and what is the medical connection between that and the COVID. But then, so these are all ways of some kind of cultural solidarity, and especially in a situation where the disease, this also you can connect to the earlier epidemic. Sometimes if it's so challenging because the actual cause itself is not known. So here also there are some ideas of where it came from and the possible. So it's a kind of a flu and all those things. But then fuller understanding took some time. So till that time, some kind of these are all. So this also goes to add to the point that medicine is not just about medicine, and there's so many matters of the heart rather than the art of medicine itself. So this is a kind of cultural bonding, show of cultural cohesiveness that we are all. So in spite of the suffering, so we are doing something. We are all together. So. And one of the other things which came, since we have been referring to and also we'll discussing about indigenous systems of medicine and all that. So here also there was room for alternative kind of remedies. So a lot of people took to their own medication, self-medication, to hide the symptoms or prevent the symptoms or avoid testing and being detected and then being sent to quarantine. So many, in fact, homegrown remedies like steaming. The people, they each add their own. What do you put in that water? Whether just hot water or put this leaf, that leaf, or creating concoctions with several leaves and pepper and this and that. So people had their own formula: 18 ingredients, 12 ingredients, and some of it might have been based on some text, but some of it just based on experience and their own belief that this would boost immunity. And there was one particular thing, especially in this part of the country, in Tamil Nadu, there was a particular concoction made, it's called Kabashura Kudinir, which is a kind of a drink made of herbal material. And the interesting thing is that the Ministry of Ayush, which is the ministry dealing with indigenous systems, Ayush is standing for Ayurveda, Yoga, Unani, Siddha, and homeopathy. So basically all the alternative, so we can't say indigenous. As we will see later, the term indigenous is itself generally a problem, but homeopathy is something which came from outside, from Europe, the H part of it. But the non biomedicine, particular department, ministry. Earlier it was a department, now it's a ministry, Ayush. So this ministry, in fact, gave official approval to Kapasura Kudineer as a proper immunity booster for handling COVID. So now it's even available in allopathic pharmacies. So that's an interesting thing how these epidemics also provide an opportunity for getting back to some of our roots, our own cultural or cultural culture added inflected kinds of remedies. Uh, so this also gave a sense of belonging. So okay, these are things which we are used to. This is how our grandfathers used to be so robust, and this kind of disease came or that kind of thing came in our village, they were spared. So that kind of, so instead of just thinking of what the government is saying and the kind of scientific descriptions given and the assurance of vaccine coming and all that. So in the meantime, so these kinds of elements. And also, as I said, the initial period when there was not enough knowledge of the disease and its origin and the way to tackle it in a scientific way. So, all this provided ample room for cultural customizations, both in input, in the habits, and also the kinds of medication intakes, other things. And one other important thing we can compare with the earlier instances of epidemics we have covered. So there we were talking about international pressures, international politics, and how they had an impact on the way the epidemic was looked, or epidemic measures were forced upon by the colonial government. So here also there are some clear international dimensions. So the World Health Organization, so right from the beginning, it had been playing a very robust role. Of course, from time to time, it was also dithering, saying something one day and saying something after 1 month about what was the cause and what was the nature. But still, I think by and large, so it played a very pivotal role. And international governments also came together, and there was a reasonable measure of agreements on closure of international airspace, on travel and or checking, and other kinds of facilities, in particular airports for incoming and outgoing travelers. And vaccine distribution also took on a very international, apart from philanthropic agencies, so government themselves. So for instance, Indian government had a very proactive vaccine helping program to help especially third world countries with supply of the vaccines that were though not invented here but produced large scale. And in fact, there was one particular vaccine which was even made here, homegrown, and also produced, and which were made available to other countries. And one other area of cooperation was the better gathering and sharing of information among countries. So, now coming back to the Epidemic Diseases Act, so one of the criticism is that it's more of a policing act. So, how can the government exercise the various kinds of controls, and what are the kinds of things, compliances that the government can expect from the citizens? So, it doesn't say like the government should do these things. There's no kind of responsibilities of the government. So, it's only about what the government can do to the people. So, and also another criticism is that, so this is a kind of a shortcut available to avoid or delay more difficult options which might be less intrusive or restrictive, but can be more costly and more taking more effort, like wider public education campaign, counseling, or encouraging local community initiatives. Of course, in this situation it was tried, so all different methods were tried. But the problem with that act again is that it doesn't have not much of an inbuilt guidance and emphasis on ethical issues, or about the scientific options to be adopted or responsibilities of the government. But still, in our case, in the COVID case, there were very distinct ways in which science and technology was brought to service. So, for instance, so in India, we saw efforts to make mass and faster production of particular kinds of instruments like ventilators or personal protective equipment or oxygen cylinders, which were in great demand. Then there was, as I said, vaccine research promoted internationally. So several countries were in it, and in India also there was a particular vaccine produced internally. And so apart from that, so the other vaccine invented elsewhere that also produced on a big scale. So these are ways in which science and technology came immediately to the play, and so countries were aspiring for self-sufficiency in the production and supply of vaccine, plus also these kinds of other instruments like ventilators. So using science and technology. But still, there are, again, going back to the Epidemic Diseases Act, there are several issues, potholes. And in fact, so there was an amendment bill passed in 2020 with some modifications. So this is Epidemic Diseases Amendment Act 2020, which brought amendments to the 1897 Original Colonial Act. So one of the important aspects of this is to include punishments for those who are attacking doctors and health workers, as I said. So that was also happening. The public were seeing the doctors as intruding too much into their lives and their movements, and so a lot of attack on property. So they themselves were seen as kind of a public property who had to be protected. So apart from the hospital, so the thing. But then, as there's a lot more which has to be which has to go into the act, especially as I said. So there should also be some kind of responsibilities, moral and otherwise expected of governments should be listed out, and then considering the different kinds of times we are living in, so there should be a greater focus on ethical issues, privacy issues and all that. And let's hope that we don't need to wait for another epidemic or pandemic to include this. I hope so those will be incorporated and this will be ready if at all, and hopefully we will not face this kind of epidemic or pandemic, but it's good to keep improving on these kinds of external structures and legislations which help. And we'll close on that note this tutorial. Thank you.